On the night of March 24th to 25th, 1944, in the small German town of Sagan, located in eastern Germany, an event occurred that would forever be etched into the history of World War II. 76 captured Allied Air Force officers escaped overnight from the most secure prisoner of war camp for pilots, which the Germans considered absolutely impregnable. They reached freedom through an underground tunnel, approximately 100 meters long, dug 9 meters beneath the camp. This escape had been in preparation for a whole year. More than 600 prisoners of war took part, and all of this took place right under the noses of several hundred German guards, trained specifically to prevent precisely this kind of action. This escape became so famous that it was later called The Great Escape. A Hollywood film of the same name from 1963 tells this very story, albeit with many Hollywood liberties. The real events of that March 1944 were far more dramatic and tragic than depicted in the film, and the captured officers paid a very high price for this escape. Today we'll tell you about the most famous and most incredible escape in the history of World War II. We'll show you how one man, suffering from claustrophobia, organized the digging of 3 enormous underground tunnels, and we'll reveal the main secret, why this attempt by captured soldiers to break free ended in one of Nazi Germany's most heinous war crimes. To understand what Stalag Luft III was, one must first understand how the Germans treated captured Allied pilots during World War II. The German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, considered itself a special caste within the entire German military. They respected other pilots, even if those pilots served in enemy armies. Therefore, captured British, American, and other Allied pilots were usually sent to special camps that reported directly to Luftwaffe command. These camps were called Stalag Luft, which translates as air camp. Stalag Luft III was built in 1942. It was located in a dense pine forest near the small town of Sagan in eastern Germany. Today, this town is in Poland and is called Sagan. The camp occupied a vast area of approximately 60 hectares. This was roughly the size of 100 football fields. The camp was divided into several separate sectors. The most important of these was the so-called Northern Sector. It was here that the best captured Allied air officers were held, and it was from here that the famous escape took place. A unique feature of Stalag Luft III was that the Germans had specifically designed it to be impenetrable. They had learned from all the previous escapes from other camps and tried to eliminate the possibility of repeating the same mistakes. First and foremost, the camp was surrounded by 2 rows of barbed wire. Between the rows was a narrow zone, manned around the clock by guards with dogs. Any prisoner who crossed the line closest to the inner side of the fence was subject to lethal fire without warning. Tall watchtowers with searchlights and machine guns stood along the entire perimeter of the camp. These searchlights continuously illuminated the area at night. Any moving object within the camp was instantly caught in their light. But the most important thing about this camp was its defense against underground escapes. The Germans knew that digging underground tunnels was the most popular method of escaping captivity. Therefore, they developed several sophisticated systems to detect such activity. Firstly, all the barracks were built not on the ground, but on special wooden or concrete piles. This meant that there was about half a meter of free space under each barrack. Guards could walk underneath the barracks at any time and check whether prisoners were digging anywhere under the floor. Secondly, the Germans installed special seismic microphones around the entire perimeter of the camp. These microphones picked up any underground vibrations and could detect tunnel digging in advance. Thirdly, the very soil around the camp worked against the prisoners. The ground in this area consisted of two distinct layers. The top layer, about half a meter thick, was ordinary dark soil. Beneath it lay a thick layer of bright yellow sand. This was the perfect defense for the Germans. If the prisoners began digging a tunnel and brought up the yellow sand, the guards would immediately notice it against the dark surface of the camp grounds. No matter where the prisoners tried to hide this sand, its bright color would immediately reveal their work. Because of this unique soil, the Germans were absolutely certain that tunneling was impossible here, but they underestimated the will and ingenuity of the prisoners. By the beginning of 1943, Stalag Luft III already held over 1,500 captured pilots. These were the most experienced and determined officers in the Allied Air Force. Many of them had already escaped from other camps and were specially transferred to Stalag Luft III as particularly dangerous. Among these prisoners was one man who turned out to be the most unlikely figure in this entire story. His name was Roger Bushell. He was of South African descent, born in a small mining town in South Africa in 1910. From the age of 13, he studied at prestigious schools in England. Bushell received a law degree from Cambridge, and at the beginning of the war became a pilot in the Royal Air Force. He commanded a squadron of the famous Spitfires and shot down many German planes. In 1940, his own plane was shot down over France during the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk. He was subsequently captured by the Germans. Bushell was a very charismatic and energetic man. He spoke several languages fluently, including German, French, and Spanish. This gave him a huge advantage in escaping. By the time he was transferred to Stalag Luft III, he had already made 2 escape attempts from other camps. Both attempts ended in failure, and each time he was harshly punished and transferred to a new camp. The most striking thing about Bushell was that he suffered from severe claustrophobia. That is, he was incredibly afraid of enclosed, dark spaces. This seemed an utterly impossible combination for a man who was about to become the chief organizer of the digging of long underground tunnels. He himself admitted to his comrades that sometimes the mere thought of a cramped, dark space made him ill. But Bushell overcame his fear. He understood that escape was the only way to continue the fight against Nazi Germany, and he was prepared to make any sacrifice, including overcoming his own deep psychological problems. When news of a mass escape being planned at Stalag Luft III began circulating among the prisoners, rumors and speculations arose within the camp and among the German guards. Some guards joked that the captured pilots were attempting to dig an underground passage to England. Others believed the prisoners had some secret plan to hijack one of the guard trucks. Theories circulated that the British were preparing an airborne operation to free the prisoners using paratroopers. Some believed the prisoners possessed a secret radio transmitter, using it to coordinate some complex international plan. The most outrageous rumors claimed the prisoners were planning to use ancient underground mines beneath the camp, unknown even to the German architects. The reality turned out to be far simpler and far more impressive. The prisoners had no secret maps, no ancient infrastructure, and no outside help. They had only their own ingenuity, tenacity, and incredible organization. In the spring of 1943, Bushell convened a secret meeting of the most determined prisoners in one of the camp's barracks. At this meeting, he announced his grandiose plan. There would be no more small individual escapes. All the prisoners' efforts would be concentrated on one massive operation. They would dig 3 large tunnels at once. According to Bushell's plan, these weren't just tunnels, they were engineering feats of true professionalism. Each tunnel was to be approximately 100 meters long. Each was to be 9 meters underground. This was a level below the Germans' most sensitive seismic microphones. 3 tunnels simultaneously was intended as a safety net. Bushell believed that if the Germans found 1 or even 2 tunnels, they wouldn't realize there was a third. They would think they'd found everything and relax. Then the last remaining tunnel would bring the operation to a successful conclusion. The tunnels were given simple male code names: Tom, Dick, and Harry. These names were used for secrecy. If the guards eavesdropped on the prisoners' conversations and heard something like, "How is Tom doing today?" they assumed it was a discussion about some fellow prisoner. The tunnel digging process itself was an incredibly complex engineering challenge. First and foremost, the problem of tunnel entrances had to be solved. All 3 entrances were ingeniously hidden. The entrance to Tunnel Harry was located in Barracks 104, under the stove. This stove was always kept on to prevent the guards from even thinking about looking inside. Under the stove, the prisoners constructed a special hatch out of concrete tiles, which could only be removed by skilled hands. The entrance to Tunnel Tom was in the corner of one of the barracks, in a very narrow space that looked like an ordinary corner of a room. The entrance to Tunnel Dick was in the floor of the shower room, under one of the drains. Tunnel Dick had the most ingenious concealment of all. Since it began in the shower room, any sounds of digging or movement within could be explained away as the normal running of the plumbing. Once the entrances were prepared, the actual digging began. Each tunnel had 3 rooms. At the very beginning was the so-called head, from where the actual work took place. In the middle was a temporary storage area for tools and a rest area for the diggers. And at the very end was the so-called work area, where the real work took place. Digging the tunnels was incredibly difficult and dangerous. At a depth of 9 meters, there was very little air. The prisoners had to devise a complex ventilation system using homemade bellows and tubes fashioned from tin cans. At a depth of 9 meters, it was also extremely dark. The prisoners used grease lamps, which they fashioned from whatever materials were available. When they managed to steal electrical wires from the Germans, they connected their lamps directly to the camp's own electrical system. Reinforcing the tunnel walls was especially challenging. The local sand constantly crumbled, and any careless movement could cause the entire underground passage to collapse. The prisoners used wooden planks from their own bunks to reinforce the walls. They removed 1 or 2 planks from each bunk, gradually accumulating material for several hundred meters of tunnel. When the Germans saw bunks constantly breaking in one barracks, the prisoners blamed the poor quality of the wood. The biggest problem was the yellow sand, which constantly needed to be disposed of. Up to several hundred kilograms of this sand were mined from the tunnels every day. Where to hide it? The prisoners came up with an ingenious solution. They sewed special canvas bags that they carried under their trouser legs. These bags had special strings that the prisoner could use to discreetly open the bottom flap. As they walked through the camp grounds, they gradually poured the yellow sand from the bags directly onto the ground. Immediately afterward, they firmly trampled the sand into the ordinary dark earth. In this way, several dozen prisoners could distribute many kilograms of sand throughout the camp in a single day. The system was so effective that the guards went unnoticed for a long time. The prisoners also used special hiding places under the floors of the barracks, in small flower beds, under the camp theater stage, and in dozens of other places. Every cubic meter of earth excavated from the tunnels had to go somewhere, and during their work the prisoners distributed several thousand cubic meters of yellow sand throughout the camp. Some of the key players in this incredible operation deserve special mention. The chief engineer designing and digging the tunnels was a Canadian pilot named Wallace Floody. Before the war, he had worked as an engineer for a mining company in Canada. As such, he was well-versed in underground work, reinforcing tunnel walls and ventilation systems. Without his expertise, digging a tunnel of such length and depth would have been virtually impossible. Floody personally spent hundreds of hours underground, supervising the work of other prisoners. He constantly checked the quality of the wall reinforcement, the condition of the ventilation systems, and the accuracy of the direction of each new meter of tunnel. The chief forger was a British pilot named Tim Wallen. He was able to forge German documents with such precision that even experienced border officers could not distinguish them from the real thing. Wallen personally created fake identity cards, work permits, and travel documents for all 200 prisoners planning to escape. Each document required several hours of painstaking work. Reproducing the special seals and stamps of German government agencies was particularly challenging. Wallen made these seals from soap, cardboard, and metal parts, embossing them with inscriptions and emblems. His forgeries were so accomplished that many of them are still preserved in museums today as examples of the true art of forgery. It's impossible not to mention the special team that counterfeited civilian clothing. These prisoners worked in a special workshop disguised as an ordinary clothing repair shop. They took ordinary military greatcoats and uniform jackets and gradually transformed them into civilian jackets and coats. They removed all military insignia, sewed on new buttons, and altered the cut and color of the fabric. By the end of the operation, this workshop had produced over 200 complete sets of civilian clothing, outwardly indistinguishable from ordinary German suits of the time. Some of these suits even had hidden compartments sewn inside for maps, documents, and money. If the German guards had ever seen this workshop, they would have immediately shut down the entire operation. Therefore, the prisoners guarded it especially carefully. They had their own system for monitoring the German guards. If a German approached, a special signalman would sound a quiet signal, and the entire workshop would instantly transform into an ordinary, harmless storage room. Parallel to the tunnel digging, a massive effort was underway to prepare everything necessary for the escape itself. The prisoners needed civilian documents, civilian clothing, food for the journey, local maps, compasses, and many other items. For each of these tasks, Bushell selected specialists from among the camp's most talented prisoners. One of them had been a professional artist in civilian life. He forged German documents of such high quality that it was virtually impossible to distinguish them from genuine ones. Other prisoners sewed perfectly acceptable civilian suits from their blankets and other fabrics. Still others drew maps of the area around the camp and far beyond from memory. Some made homemade compasses from magnetized razor blades. So-called German hunters played a crucial role. These were prisoners who gained the trust of individual guards and bribed them with cigarettes, chocolate, or other scarce goods. The prisoners coaxed small but crucial items from these guards, such as buttons for civilian clothing, ink for forging documents, samples of real German documents, which were then copied. If the Germans had discovered which of their guards had helped the prisoners, those guards would have been executed immediately. In September 1943, the first major disaster occurred. The Germans accidentally discovered the Tom Tunnel just as it was about to reach its designated exit point in the forest outside the camp. This was a huge loss for the entire operation. Several months of hard work were wasted. Following this discovery, the Germans significantly increased security and conducted several additional searches of all the barracks. The prisoners were forced to suspend work on the remaining 2 tunnels to calm the guards and keep them unaware of the existence of other passages. A few months later, Bushel decided to abandon the Dick Tunnel entirely and concentrate all remaining efforts on the Gary Tunnel. The Dick Tunnel became a storage facility for sand and tools from the Gary Tunnel. By early March 1944, the Gary Tunnel was finally complete. It was approximately 102 meters long and about 9 meters deep. Inside, it was equipped with its own lighting system, ventilation, and even a simple wooden cart on rails for transporting people and goods through the tunnel. The escape date was set for March 24, 1944. Bushel chose this date specifically for several reasons. First, it was a moonless night, significantly reducing visibility for the German guards. Second, the tunnel would be completely finished by this point. And third, the weather was expected to be cold, but without heavy snowfall. The plan was for 200 of the most select prisoners to pass through the tunnel. They were divided into several groups. The first 30 were called the Serenaders. They had the best chance of a successful escape. They spoke several foreign languages, had the best forged documents, and were to immediately board passenger trains and travel as far away from the camp as possible. The remaining 170 men were divided into groups that were to exit the tunnel as soon as possible. Their tasks were simpler. They were simply to make their way on foot through German territory toward neutral countries or the front lines. And then came that historic night. At 10:30 a.m., the first prisoner, Johnny Bull, began crawling through the narrow, hairy tunnel. He was supposed to be the first to emerge and signal the others. A few minutes later, he reached the end of the tunnel. And there, terrible news awaited him. The tunnel's length had been miscalculated. The tunnel ended not in the forest itself, as planned, but in an open field just a few meters from the trees. This meant that guards from a nearby watchtower could see the prisoners emerging. Bushel and his team were forced to change their plan at the very last moment. Now the prisoners could only exit the tunnel when the watchtower's searchlight was shining in the wrong direction. This significantly slowed the entire escape. Instead of the expected 200, only 76 prisoners made it out overnight. At 5 o'clock in the morning on March 25th, the 77th prisoner was spotted by a German guard just as he was exiting the tunnel. The command to stop was given. All the remaining prisoners still in the tunnel hastily returned to their barracks. The alarm had been raised. The Great Escape was over. On the morning of March 25th, the German command was absolutely furious. When news of the escape reached Adolf Hitler in Berlin, the Führer demanded the harshest retribution. Tens of thousands of police and SS soldiers were deployed across eastern Germany to search for the fugitives. It was the largest manhunt in military history. Of the 76 escapees, only 3 managed to finally escape. These were 2 Norwegian pilots, Per Bergsland and Jens Müller, who reached Sweden, and 1 Dutch pilot named Bob Vanderstock, who managed to fly across Europe and reach Gibraltar. The remaining 73 prisoners were gradually recaptured by the Germans in locations ranging from Poland to the Czech Republic. Hitler personally demanded that all captured escapees be executed as a terrible warning to other Allied prisoners. Himmler somewhat softened this order. Ultimately, 50 prisoners were chosen for execution. They were divided into different groups and shot by the Gestapo in various forests and fields across eastern Germany. Among those killed was Roger Bushel himself. This great man, who overcame his own claustrophobia and organized the most complex escape in the history of military camps, was shot dead near Saarbrücken on March 31, 1944, along with one of his closest comrades. The execution of 50 Allied officers was one of Nazi Germany's most heinous war crimes against the Western Allies. According to all international military treaties, prisoners had the right to attempt escape. Punishment for attempting to escape was limited to extended solitary confinement. No execution was provided for this. Hitler's Germany openly violated the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. After the war, several Gestapo officers who had personally participated in the executions were found and sentenced to death by Allied military tribunals. But many other perpetrators of this crime managed to escape or evade justice. The story of the Great Escape from Stalag Luft III has forever remained a symbol of the courage and resistance of Allied airmen against Nazi tyranny. And perhaps the most important lesson of this story is that even in the most hopeless conditions, even under the barbed wire of the most guarded camp in the world, the human spirit can find a way to continue the fight. The 76 airmen who crawled out of Harry's tunnel one by one on that cold March night in 1944 knew the potential consequences. They took enormous risks for the sake of freedom and struggle. 50 of them paid with their lives, but their escape will forever go down in history as one of the most powerful symbols of human will against tyranny. And when someone talks about the Great Escape today, they're not just talking about those 102 meters of underground tunnel. They're talking about 102 meters of hope, ingenuity, and the unparalleled courage of ordinary people in the face of the most terrible dictatorship of the 20th century.